While my parents let my sister parade as a self-made CEO, I was hand-stitching dresses in a basement just to eat. The business she claims to own? I built it. She just changed the login passwords. But guess who has all the invoices? Guess who's about to go public? I'm Bronwyn, and I've spent the last 5 years being invisible to my family while my sister strutted around as a self-made CEO of a company I built from scraps and desperation. I created the designs. I handled every stitch. I paid the early bills from my own pocket. She changed the passwords. She plastered her name on it. My parents cheered her on like she walked on water. But now, I'm done being quiet. I have all the receipts, literally. And I'm about to go public. I didn't grow up thinking I'd one day be at war with my own sister. It's not something you plan for, having the person who shared your childhood end up betraying you in the most calculated, ruthless way possible. But that's exactly what happened. Our childhood wasn't tragic, but it was lopsided. My family lived in a cozy two-story in Broad Ripple, a neighborhood in Indianapolis filled with old oaks and porch swings. My parents weren't rich, but they were comfortable. And from the time we were little, it was obvious they saw Aviana, my younger sister, as their golden child. Aviana was born with a head of shiny blonde curls and this magnetic, bubbly personality that got her out of nearly everything. She was always center stage, dance recitals, birthday parties, family reunions. When I tried to speak up, my voice always seemed too small, too uncertain. I was quiet, bookish, always sketching. My teachers called me creative. My parents called me the other one. While Aviana twirled through childhood being adored, I found peace in art and design. My grandmother had taught me how to sew before she passed, and I clung to it. It became my language. By middle school, I was making simple skirts. By high school, I had a second-hand Singer machine in my bedroom and spent most weekends teaching myself to cut and shape fabric. My parents thought it was cute, like a hobby, something I'd outgrow. They had bigger dreams for Aviana. She went to Butler University for marketing, came home talking about branding and scaling and growth strategy before she even knew how to make her own coffee. Meanwhile, I worked 3 part-time jobs while taking fashion and textile classes at Ivy Tech. Not exactly glamorous, but it was all I could afford. I got married at 26 to a man I thought I loved. Callan was charismatic, full of big plans. He wanted to open a gastropub downtown. I supported him, even offered to design the uniforms and table linens. But he drank more than he worked, and within a year, I was drowning in unpaid bills and apologies. He left. No note, no goodbye, just vanished one day with half our joint savings. I moved in with my cousin Irene, who had an unfinished basement in her house in Fountain Square. No heating. No windows. Just concrete walls, a cot, and the smell of mildew. I brought my sewing machine, a couple rolls of fabric, and the last $87 in my bank account. From that basement, I started Gossamer Thread Company. I didn't have a business plan. I had hunger, heartbreak, and a pair of calloused hands. I started making dresses again, one-off commissions for weddings, proms, and formal events. I used Instagram to show my work, and slowly, people started noticing. My designs were original, soft, vintage-inspired silhouettes with intricate details you couldn't buy off a rack. Clients loved that I listened, that I customized everything. I named the brand Gossamer Thread Company because it felt delicate, real, and mine. I handled every aspect: cutting, sewing, packaging, shipping, emailing clients, marketing. I had a website, an Etsy shop, and a growing client list. I documented everything. Every order. Every invoice. Every email. I kept records like a paranoiac because I had been burned too many times. Then Aviana reached out. She had been working some forgettable marketing job at a local real estate firm but said she wanted more. I see what you're doing, she said during a coffee meetup. It's raw. It's gorgeous. But you need polish. You need a brand strategy. I didn't trust her entirely, but part of me wanted to. She was my sister. And honestly, I was exhausted. I was doing everything alone, sleeping on a cot, skipping meals to buy zippers and thread. She offered to help set up better branding, said she'd pitch to boutiques and bridal expos. I'd still be the designer, she'd just handle the face of the business. She even said, "You'll finally get to just do what you love." I didn't ask for money. I gave her access to Instagram, the website login, and the email account. We moved into a tiny studio space that I helped paint and furnish. She printed business cards with CEO, Aviana Rothwell, in gold font. That should have been my first red flag. But I kept stitching. I kept designing. When our gowns were featured at the Cincinnati Bridal Expo, we booked 16 new clients in one weekend. People loved the dresses. Loved my designs. But every time Aviana spoke to a crowd or a client, it was my vision for the brand, and I started this company with a dream that. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. She hired an assistant without asking. A social media manager. A part-time seamstress to keep up with production, even though I had no say in what got outsourced. I started noticing errors, hem lengths wrong, stitching sloppy. She brushed it off, people can't tell the difference. Then I got locked out of Instagram. Then the email. Then the Shopify dashboard. I confronted her at the studio. Her expression? Cold. Detached. You're emotional, she said, like I was some hysterical employee, not the founder. This is what scaling looks like. You wouldn't understand. She fired me. From the company I started. No paperwork. No explanation. Just an envelope with a check for $3,200 and a condescending note that read, "Best of luck in your future creative endeavors." I sat on the steps outside the studio in the cold, holding that envelope like it was a death certificate. But I wasn't broken. I went back to that basement. And I opened my folders. Invoices. Design sketches with timestamps. Emails between me and the first 80 clients. The LLC paperwork? She had filed it months after we'd already been operational under the Gossamer name. I had digital evidence of sales, content, and brand development that predated her involvement by over a year. I contacted an attorney that a former client had recommended. A woman named Margot, sharp as a razor blade and just as precise. She looked at my documentation and said, "You have more than enough to pursue damages. This isn't just unethical, it's theft." But I didn't want a lawsuit, not yet. I wanted my story out. I wanted people to know what really happened. So I did what Aviana never expected me to do. I started talking. Quietly, at first. I created a new Instagram under my name, at Bronwyn Lark Designs, and began sharing my side of the story. I posted photos of my original sketches, side-by-side comparisons of the dresses I created and the cheap, poorly made versions being pushed through the new Gossamer pipeline. I shared testimonials from early clients who confirmed they had worked with me long before Aviana ever showed up. And then I posted the receipts. Not metaphorically, literally. Screenshots of invoices dated before the LLC was filed. Emails from clients dated before she had access to the account. Side-by-side screenshots of the original Etsy listings, the branding language I wrote, the social media captions she had simply copied and pasted as her own. I didn't name her directly, not at first. I just told the story as it was, honest, blunt, and without embellishment. I posted on any social media forum. On a bridal designer Facebook group with 50,000 members. Within a week, I had thousands of followers. Within 2 weeks, my new site, bronwynlark.com, crashed from traffic. Former clients reached out in droves, furious that their loyalty had been hijacked by someone who was now outsourcing their orders to low-quality overseas factories. Then came the media. A local journalist from the Indianapolis Monthly reached out for an interview. I met her at a little coffee shop downtown, brought my laptop, and laid everything out. The invoices. The sketches. The emails. She sat there for over an hour just listening. The article went live 2 weeks later, stitched in silence, how one local designer was cut out of her own company. It made the rounds. People were angry. Betrayed. Shocked. Boutiques that carried our line dropped her. The Women in Business Summit revoked her keynote slot. Her LinkedIn account disappeared. She stopped posting on Instagram entirely. And then, she called me. The voicemail was long and manic. She sobbed. She screamed. She accused me of destroying her reputation. Said I'd taken everything. Then she pleaded, "We're sisters, Bronwyn. Please don't do this." I didn't respond. Because here's the thing, I had responded. With facts. With receipts. With truth. And truth, When you've been living in someone else's shadow, is the sharpest form of revenge there is. I opened a new studio in Carmel, bright, minimalist, filled with plants and light. I named it after myself this time. Bronwyn Lark Designs. No fancy slogans. No fake branding. Just honest, slow-made couture. I hired 2 interns from the local trade school and paid them more than I ever paid myself in that basement. Clients returned. New ones arrived. Brides started requesting me by name. I didn't even have to take Aviana to court. The public did that for me. But just in case, I filed a cease and desist. Quiet. Professional. Firm. My parents? They still don't get it. She's still your sister, my father muttered over the phone. My mother said, you could have handled this privately. I could have. But then I'd still be eating ramen in a basement while Aviana wore Chanel and gave interviews about building her empire. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about reclamation. Of my work. My worth. My name. And I've only just begun. The thing about public truth is that once it's out there, it has a momentum of its own. And I hadn't expected that. I thought I'd share my side, correct the record, and maybe a few people would care. I didn't expect hundreds of messages. Women, mostly. Designers, small business owners, former best friends, estranged siblings. People who had poured their souls into something, only to have it snatched by someone who saw more value in stealing than in creating. Some stories made me cry. Others made me angry. But they all made me feel seen, for the first time in years. I got a DM from a boutique owner in Chicago who had carried gossamer thread gowns for a year and had always assumed Aviana was the designer. I thought she was a little fake, she wrote, but the dresses were incredible. I should have known. She invited me to relaunch my new line in her shop. Then came a message from Reva Clark. For context, Reva is the editor-in-chief of Midwest Modern Bride, a quarterly print magazine with a pretty large following. She had been following the drama quietly. Do you want to tell your story in our spring feature? She asked. Not a scandal piece. Just the truth, your truth. How do you rebuild? I didn't even hesitate. We met at my new studio on a Monday morning. She brought a photographer and a voice recorder, but she mostly just listened. I talked about the early days in Irene's basement. About sewing by headlamp when the light bulbs burned out. About eating toast with mustard because I didn't have enough for groceries. About the way my fingers cramped and bled and how I sewed through the pain because it was the only thing I knew how to do. I talked about the betrayal. The silence from my parents. The cruelty of being erased. I kept it factual. But I didn't hold back. After the interview, I stood in my studio alone for a while, looking out the window. It was snowing lightly, and for the first time in years, I felt the quiet around me wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. About a week after that, I got a formal letter from Aviana's attorney. It was polite, but pointed, a request to cease defamatory public commentary, citing potential damage to her reputation and loss of income. I handed the letter to Margot, my lawyer. She skimmed it, looked up, and said, she's bluffing. We sent a response with 57 pages of documentation, proof of creation, sales, timestamps, correspondence, designs. Everything that backed up my story. Margot CC'd a senior IP attorney just to make the message clear, we're not scared. And we're not backing down. I didn't hear from Aviana's lawyer again. What I did hear, a few days later, was from my father. He called me, out of nowhere, in the middle of the day. I was cutting lace at my work table, music playing softly. I almost didn't answer. But I did. His voice was strained, tight. Bronwyn, he said. No, hi. No, how are you? I just wanted to say, we read the article. In the magazine. I waited. And? Silence. I didn't know it was that bad. There was more silence. I thought it was a small falling out, he finally said. I didn't know she locked you out. That she took credit for your work. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the finished piece in front of me, a hand-stitched ivory gown with pearl accents that had taken me over 60 hours to make. It was delicate and strong at the same time. Like I'd become. He sighed. Your mother doesn't want to take sides. That hurt more than I expected it to. I'm not asking her to, I said, my voice steady. But I am asking you both to stop pretending she didn't do something cruel. There was a pause, then a soft, almost guilty, I don't know how to handle any of this. You don't have to handle it, I said. You just have to stop pretending I made it up. We ended the call awkwardly. No real resolution. But it felt like a crack in the wall. A tiny fracture in the blind loyalty that had always existed between them and Aviana. A week later, a package arrived at my studio. It was from my mother. Inside was a photo album. Old pictures, me as a kid sewing on the porch, a paper certificate from my middle school for most creative student, a swatch of fabric from the first real dress I ever made. No note. Just that. I didn't cry. I just sat with it for a while. Aviana, meanwhile, had gone completely quiet. No new posts. No new clients. Word had spread quickly in the tight-knit Indianapolis bridal scene. You don't steal someone's business and walk away unscathed, not when the receipts are this public. But she wasn't done. Not yet. 2 months after I launched my own label, I started hearing whispers. A new brand, under a new name, was popping up, Velvet Bridal. Same color palette. Same vague language about female empowerment. Same PR tactics. It was her. She was trying to rebrand and relaunch under a different name, hoping the dust had settled. She even tried to trademark my old dress names. That was the moment I stopped hoping for an apology. Some people don't feel remorse. They feel inconvenienced. They feel consequences. So I filed for a full trademark of Bronwyn Lark Designs, retroactive to the first Etsy sale under the original Gossamer thread handle. I added a legal clause that tied the designs to my name and likeness. If she copied even one stitch, she'd be facing a lawsuit with teeth. I didn't say a word publicly. No need. I just kept working. Orders increased. Collaborations came in. A high-end bridal boutique in Louisville asked to carry my collection. A stylist for a Netflix show reached out to borrow pieces for a fitting. And through it all, I kept my head down. I still worked late. Still ran my own machine. Still answered emails myself. But now I wasn't sewing in the dark hoping someone might notice. Now, people know. They knew who the designer was. Whose hands had shaped each pleat. Whose story had risen out of a mildew-soaked basement and bloomed into something solid, lasting. There's still more to say. There's still more to do. Because this isn't the end. Not yet. I have plans. And Aviana? She is silent. The week after I found out about Velvet Bridal, I started seeing my old dress names showing up in small local directories, same silhouettes, same color palettes, same structure. Only now, they were being modeled by generic, overly polished models in rented gowns with fake bouquets and sponsored hashtags. She was trying to mimic what I had built, again. But the thing about originality is that it's rooted in something real. Velvet looked like what it was, a soulless duplicate. Gloss without grit. Pretty but hollow. My clients could tell. And they talked. A past bride of mine, Clarissa, messaged me, just saw Velvet Bridal at an expo in Louisville. I'm 90% sure she showed a gown based on mine. I almost went up to her and said something. I thanked her, and asked for any photos she could share. She sent a few. And sure enough, Aviana had taken one of my original pieces, removed the embroidery, and tried to pass it off as her new Velvet exclusive. I forwarded the pictures to Margot. Her response? She's either incredibly bold or incredibly stupid. Turns out, both. Because 3 days later, I received a cease and desist from her. She was accusing me of interfering with her professional relationships and damaging her personal brand. She was threatening legal action if I continued to misrepresent her history with Gossamer thread. Margot laughed so hard she nearly spit her tea across her desk. She's testing your nerves, she said, calmly flipping through her binder of documents. Let her try. We've got 5 times the evidence. Her bluffing is just noise. We responded immediately, this time formally requesting a public retraction for false legal threats, misrepresentation of ownership over my designs, and the unlawful reuse of trademarked material. That part wasn't noise. The message was clear, we weren't just going to protect the truth. We were going to defend it like hell. I should have been scared. Years ago, I would have crumbled under the weight of confrontation. I'd have retreated, apologized, maybe even given her space to rebuild while I disappeared again. But this version of me? I was steel now. Quiet steel, but steel nonetheless. In the middle of all this, something strange happened. Something I wasn't prepared for. I started to heal. Not in the loud, sweeping way you see in movies. It wasn't one big moment. It was slow and awkward and quiet. It was the first time I caught myself humming while threading beads into a bodice. It was when I caught my reflection while pinning a hem, and for the first time, I didn't look tired, I looked focused. It was when a teenage girl from a local high school sent me a message saying, "I didn't know people like us could start something from nothing. Thank you for showing me that we can." I reread that one 3 times. Then there were the little things, getting my own logo stitched into my dress linings. Seeing my name printed on shipping labels. Watching a client cry tears of joy at her final fitting, hugging me like I'd done something holy. Aviana was still trying to be loud. But I'd realized something she hadn't: noise doesn't have an impact. You can flood the internet with hashtags, put on a pantsuit, and talk about female entrepreneurship until you're blue in the face. But if it's not built on truth, it doesn't last. People feel the difference between someone who shows up to be seen and someone who shows up to do the work. I started saying yes to more collaborations. A photographer in Chicago. A small online bridal magazine in Nashville. Even a podcast appearance, which terrified me, but I did it anyway. I told my story again, this time with less anger and more clarity. I wasn't just talking about betrayal anymore, I was talking about ownership, boundaries, and creative labor. I started hearing from women in entirely different industries, painters, authors, small shop owners, who had all been Aviana'd at some point in their lives. One woman wrote, "I sewed costumes for a community theater for years. They made me sign an NDA and then gave the credit to the director's niece. I never said anything. I wish I had your bravery." I didn't feel brave most days. I still dealt with anxiety. I still caught myself flinching when I opened emails from unknown senders. But I was done being quiet. Quiet hadn't protected me. Documentation had. Resilience had. Anger, refined into action, had. Around early March, I got a text from Irene. Guess who came crying to Aunt Loretta? I didn't have to guess. Aviana, apparently, was making the family rounds, trying to rebuild bridges the way she always had, with charm, a few well-placed tears, and some vague apology about how things got out of hand. She'd told Aunt Loretta that she felt misunderstood, that I'd always overreacted, and that she didn't mean to hurt me. But she still hadn't called me. I didn't expect her to. She couldn't apologize to my face because she still didn't believe she had done anything wrong. People like her don't understand the damage they do because they don't see other people's work as real. It's just material to them, something to borrow, to build on, to own. Irene, bless her, wasn't buying it. She tried to say you were getting big-headed and should have kept it in the family, she texted. I told her if she wanted to keep anything in the family, she should have started with basic decency. That made me laugh harder than I had in weeks. My cousin had always been a quiet ally in my life, but now she was something more, someone who saw me. That mattered. Then, in April, something happened that knocked the wind out of me, again, but in a different way. I was invited to New York. Not for a vacation. Not for an expo. For a feature. An editor from Wren Bridal Journal reached out. They'd seen the Midwest Modern Bride article, checked out my work, and wanted to highlight me as one of their emerging designers to watch. It was a print feature. National circulation. The real deal. I cried after that email. Not a little. Fully. Not because I'd made it, I hadn't. Not yet. But because someone outside of Indiana, someone without any stake in my story, saw the work for what it was. Not as stolen. Not as controversial. But as worthy. I booked my flight that same day. I landed in New York with a suitcase that barely zipped, a garment bag of handmade samples, and more nervous energy than I'd felt in a decade. The Wren Bridal Journal studio was in Chelsea, all glass and industrial ceilings and big soft light. The editor, Jules, greeted me like we were old friends. She'd been following my story quietly for months. "We don't just want to feature your work," she said. "We want to talk about your resilience, about how you built something original while being erased." I nodded. I am used to talking about it now. But there was something about hearing the word resilience from someone who didn't owe me anything that hit differently. The photo shoot lasted 4 hours. They draped my gowns on professional models, styled them with silk gloves and vintage veils. I watched from the side, hands tucked in my sleeves, watching these women float in pieces I had sewn alone in a basement just 3 years earlier. After the shoot, Jules sat me down for a video segment. "We're doing a short-form doc for our YouTube," she explained. "You can be as raw or as polished as you want. You control the tone." I took a breath. Then I told everything. From the moldy cot to the viral post. From the fake cease and desist to the new studio. From my sister locking me out of my own life, to taking back every single thread of it. They released the video 3 weeks later. And that's when the real revenge began. The Ren feature blew up. Thousands of views in the first 48 hours. Comments poured in, designers, creatives, small business owners, lawyers, even teachers. People who knew what it meant to be overshadowed. To be stolen from. To be dismissed. The video hit the right people, too. Among them, a boutique in Charleston. A stylist for a streaming network. An editor from Bridal Vogue Europe. And, most importantly, a buyer for the Midwest Bridal Collective, a group of regional showrooms and suppliers across Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Ohio. They invited me to be a keynote designer at their autumn gala. One of the biggest buyer showcases in the region. Guess who had been trying to get into that event for years? Aviana. Guess who was blacklisted after the Gossamer scandal? Also Aviana. I didn't say her name during my speech at the gala. I didn't have to. I talked about integrity in design. About building slowly. About trusting the process when it feels like no one sees you. About how not all theft is physical, how erasure is a theft too. The speech got a standing ovation. By the time I left that night, I had 5 boutique offers, a collaboration with an indie bridal magazine, and, ironically, a wholesaler who had previously worked with Gossamer Thread asking to reconnect on ethical terms. I smiled and said, "Sure. Let me get my lawyer to draw something up." And then came the moment I didn't plan for, but secretly hoped would happen. A few months later, at a small industry expo in Bloomington, I was approached by a woman from a local startup incubator. She was organizing a panel on female entrepreneurship and ethical business models. She wanted to feature me. I almost said yes on the spot. But then she said, "I already have a few names lined up, including your sister, Aviana Rothwell. Have you heard of her?" I laughed. Loudly. The woman blinked. "Oh?" I leaned in, still smiling. "I have, yes. I'd recommend doing a little background research before you finalize the guest list. Let me know if you need help finding anything." I gave her my business card. The one that said Bronwyn Lark, owner and designer, BLD. Then I walked away. A week later, I got a follow-up email. Aviana had been removed from the panel. About a month after that, I got another letter. Not from her lawyer, this time from her. It was handwritten. Sloppy. Rushed. A mix of defensiveness, weird sentimentality, and an attempt to rewrite history. She said she was sorry things got messy. She said she never meant to hurt me, but also implied that branding isn't theft, and that I could have shared the spotlight. She asked me not to keep bringing up the past, and to let go so we can both move forward. There was no acknowledgement of the studio lockout. No mention of the fake legal threats. No apology for trying to trademark my designs under her second business. Just the same old Aviana, deflect, deflect, deflect. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Because she knows now. She knows the world sees the truth. And I didn't have to scream. I just had to stand still while her lies unraveled. It's been 2 years now since I started over. Since I walked out of that studio with nothing but a check and a broken heart. Today, I employed 3 seamstresses and an apprentice. I offer paid internships for design students from low-income backgrounds. My studio in Carmel is thriving. My name is known not because of controversy, but because of the work. The gowns. The story behind the stitches. I've never spoken to Aviana again. I doubt I ever will. But sometimes I wonder if she sees the articles. The interviews. The glowing reviews. If she hears my name now in the circles she once wanted so desperately to belong to. And if she does? I hope she realizes she didn't just lose a brand. She lost the only person who ever believed in her. And I didn't even have to scream. I just kept sewing.